Nobody in Europe could agree on what to call him. The Spanish called him a devil. The Venetians called him a ghost. The Pope called him the scourge of Christendom. The Ottoman Sultan called him the greatest commander who had ever sailed the sea. And somewhere underneath all of those names, underneath the fear and the fury and the legend, there was a man who was born the son of a retired soldier on a small Greek island, who should have lived and died in complete anonymity, but instead became the one man the combined naval power of Europe could not stop. This is the story of Hayreddin Barbarossa, and I promise you, by the time we're done, you will never understand the Mediterranean the same way again. Let's place you right in the middle of September 1538. The Pope has done something that almost never happens in European politics. He has convinced Spain, Venice, Genoa, and the Papal States to set aside their rivalries, their grudges, their competing interests, and unite under a single fleet. They call it the Holy League, and they build something terrifying. 302 warships, 60,000 soldiers, the greatest combined Christian naval force assembled in the 16th century, all of it pointed at one man. The man commanding the Ottoman fleet waiting for them near the Greek coast of Preveza has roughly 120 galleys, less than half their number. By every calculation anyone on that Holy League fleet could make, this should be over before it begins. What happens next is the kind of thing military historians still argue about nearly 5 centuries later. Barbarossa looks at that armada, a fleet more than twice his size, and he attacks. To understand how a man gets to that moment, how a person develops the kind of confidence to sail into those odds and win, you have to go back to where it all started. Hayreddin was born on the island of Lesbos, which at the time was part of the Ottoman Empire, sometime around 1478. His father, Jakob, was a former soldier, his mother, a Greek woman named Katerina, and he grew up in the kind of household that exists at the intersection of worlds, part Ottoman, part Greek, part of everything the Mediterranean was at that point in history. He had 3 brothers, and the one who mattered most to his story was Oruç, the eldest, the bold one, the one who first took to the sea and pulled his younger brother into a life that would change everything. The two of them started as corsairs, privateers operating in the Mediterranean, raiding ships and building a reputation one confrontation at a time. They were good at it. Good enough that word of them started spreading from port to port across the sea, and the name Barbarossa, Italian for red beard, a nickname that likely came from Oruç's famously reddish hair, started being spoken in harbors where people didn't even know what language they spoke. But this story only becomes the story it becomes when the Spanish enter the picture. In 1516, Spain controlled a fortress on a small island just off the coast of Algiers called the Peñón, a strategic choke point that let them effectively hold the city hostage and extract tribute. The people of Algiers, unable to push the Spanish out themselves, sent for Oruç. He came, he took Algiers, he declared himself its ruler. He was brilliant, charismatic, and reckless in equal measure, and in 1518, while fighting the Spanish near Tlemcen in western Algeria, he was killed. His army abandoned him. The Spanish surrounded him, and Oruç Reis, the man who started all of this, died in the desert far from the sea he loved. Hayreddin was now alone. Most people, at that point, would have made peace, retreated, found a quiet life somewhere that wasn't a war zone. Hayreddin did the opposite. He looked at everything his brother had built, the fragile, contested hold over Algiers, the enemies on every side, the Spanish watching from their island fortress just off the coast, and he made a decision that defined the rest of his life. He sent an embassy to Constantinople and offered Algiers to Suleiman the Magnificent in exchange for men, ships, and Ottoman protection. Suleiman, who understood exactly what a foothold in North Africa meant for Ottoman reach across the Mediterranean, accepted. He sent 2,000 janissaries. And just like that, Hayreddin went from being a corsair scrambling to hold territory to being the appointed governor of Algiers on behalf of the most powerful empire in the world. What he did with that backing was extraordinary. He didn't just defend what he had, he expanded. In 1529, he captured the Peñón of Algiers, the very Spanish fortress that had held the city under threat for years, and used the stones from the demolished fortification to build a harbor that would serve as his naval base. He was doing something more than fighting at this point. He was building an empire of the sea, city by city, fortress by fortress, reshaping the entire strategic geography of the Western Mediterranean while Europe watched and grew increasingly alarmed. By 1533, Suleiman had seen enough to know what he had. He summoned Hayreddin to Constantinople and gave him the title Kapudan Pasha, Grand Admiral of the entire Ottoman fleet. This wasn't just a rank. It was a mandate to remake the Ottoman Navy from the inside, and Hayreddin did exactly that. He recruited talented sailors from across the Mediterranean, streamlined the fleet's organization, drilled crews with a discipline that hadn't existed before, and turned what had been a capable but inconsistent naval force into something that operated with genuine strategic coherence. The man who had started as a corsair on Greek waters was now commanding the most powerful Muslim navy in history. Then came 1538, and the moment this story opened with. The Holy League's 302 ships against Barbarossa's 120 near Preveza. What the numbers don't tell you is that the Holy League was a coalition, and coalitions carry the fundamental weakness of every member putting their own interests first. The Genoese Admiral Andrea Doria, commanding the combined fleet, personally owned several of his own ships and was deeply reluctant to sacrifice them. Venice and Genoa had been rivals for so long that cooperation between their commanders was more performance than reality. Barbarossa, commanding a unified fleet answering to a single authority, didn't have that problem. He read the hesitation in Doria's movements, understood that the Holy League would never fully commit, and struck with everything he had. The battle was devastating for the Europeans. Ships were sunk, ships were captured, and the greatest combined Christian fleet of the century sailed home shattered. Ottoman dominance over the Eastern Mediterranean was now a fact, not a theory, and it would remain so for decades. What happened after Preveza is genuinely fascinating because it reveals something about Barbarossa that the simple pirate narrative completely misses. He wasn't just a fighter. He was a diplomat, a strategist, a man who understood that power is built and sustained through relationships, not just victories. In the years following Preveza, he managed a formal military alliance between the Ottoman Empire and France, two powers that shared a common enemy in the Habsburg Emperor Charles V, and conducted joint naval campaigns in the Western Mediterranean that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. A Muslim Ottoman fleet wintering in the French port of Toulon, French and Ottoman sailors operating together in the same waters. Europe's neat political categories bending under the weight of real strategic interest. Barbarossa was at the center of all of it, orchestrating the logic behind arrangements that made the Pope's head spin. He retired to Constantinople in 1545, having spent more than 4 decades reshaping the Mediterranean world, and died there in July of 1546, peacefully in his own home, a thing almost no man of his profession ever managed. They buried him in a mausoleum designed by the great architect Mimar Sinan, right on the shores of the Bosphorus, where his fleet used to assemble before sailing out to terrify the known world. To this day, Turkish naval ships passing that tomb dip their flags in salute. The tradition has never stopped. Here's what I want to leave you with, because this is the part that actually matters. The story of Barbarossa is usually told as a pirate story, colorful, violent, episodic, a swashbuckling adventure without deeper significance. But that framing shrinks him into something manageable for the people he frightened. What he actually was is something far more interesting. He was a man born at the intersection of civilizations, Greek and Ottoman, corsair and admiral, who turned that position at the crossroads into a superpower. He understood the Mediterranean not as a boundary between worlds, but as a connector, a single space where power flowed to whoever could master its currents, its politics, and its people. And for the better part of 4 decades, nobody mastered it better than he did. If this kind of story hits you the way it hits me, the real story underneath the oversimplified version, the one that actually explains how the world worked, that's exactly what Media Point is built for. We go where the textbooks don't, and we stay until the story makes sense. If you're still here, you already know this channel is for you, so go ahead and hit subscribe right now and do me one more favor. Tap that like button before you scroll anywhere, because it tells us you want more of this, and more of this is exactly what we're planning to give you. Stay with Media Point. The next story is already waiting.